About 3 years ago, only a couple of months after we got together, me and my boyfriend were planning to move out together and he had been viewing one-bedroom flats. We had had some crappy luck and had only managed to find one that had potential, but it was in a converted house and not in a block. The upstairs had been separated from the downstairs, with the hallway being made into a small porch and 2 doors, one leading upstairs to our flat, and the other to the ground floor where the landlord lived. We accepted the flat before meeting the landlord, and it's something that I deeply regret to this day. When we did meet him, as he was away while we were viewing the flat, I can only say that first impressions of a person matter. They matter a lot. This whole gut feeling thing is real and I should have followed it. He spoke very common, in the typical, yeah mate, I like my pints, know what I mean, British accent, which irked me from the beginning. He looked strange with horribly intense, creepy blue eyes. I can't even remember vividly what he looked like, because something about him made me not want to look at him in the eye. Well, first meetings and impressions aside, he seemed kinda rough but was polite and explained the rules to living in the flat. Now before I go on, I want to say how shady this flat was now that I have lived in other flats. The electric meter was run by pound coins, and seemed to be considerably more expensive than what seemed normal. The landlord told us that he would come by monthly to collect the money that we put in. Keep in mind, we were only paying for electricity to run an upstairs of a small house, and it was costing us around $20 a week, the same amount my parents paid for their entire house in the same area. I can't remember how we paid for gas, but we didn't have a meter. The landlord also told us that we would be unable to have internet while we lived there, as it would involve making holes in the walls. The council tax was included in the rent, meaning we gave the landlord our council tax with our rent and he would pay it. It seemed off. It also didn't help that the estate agent conveniently forgot to mention that his wife had died, and that is why he had converted the upstairs. The landlord told us this with no discomfort at all, and I couldn't stop thinking about whether or not I was sleeping in the same room that she had died in. The first time the landlord confirmed my suspicions of being a bit strange was when we had moved in. He told us that he had left a sofa in the living room, and we could do with what we wanted with it, throw it away or keep it or sell it. So my parents, needing a temporary sofa, offered to take it off our hands. When my dad and boyfriend were helping put it back in the car, the landlord, who had been gardening, started freaking the heck out, saying that it was an anniversary present. A sofa, okay. And rather than telling my dad and boyfriend to leave it in the garden for him, to find somewhere to put it, he ordered them to carry it round to his garage. Horribly embarrassed, my dad and boyfriend did what he said and let it be. It seems like a silly reason to start hating someone, but just the way that he flipped, his behavior, how rude he was about it, how he had told us hours before he didn't care what we did with it, and now it was an anniversary present and how dare we not ask him first. A couple of weeks later, we started noticing that he smoked pot, a lot of it. The porch constantly smelt of it, which was embarrassing for us when guests came over. You know, I don't think anything of it, but I certainly didn't help my attitude towards him when our entire flat smelled like pot all the time. Another reason he made me uncomfortable. I used to work at a bar for the first few months that I lived there, and whenever my dad dropped me off at home at 3 a.m., when most of my shifts had finished, he would look out of his living room window. It's creepy stuff, seeing his shadowed silhouette just standing there while I walked to the front door no matter what time I came back. He also never approached me, always talked to my fiancé instead. Early in the morning when my fiancé had come home from work, the landlord had opened the door to tell him that I was too noisy coming in at night, and that he needed to tell me to be more quiet. This coming from a guy who was doing God knows what downstairs at ridiculous times in the morning. And I know that it was a silly thing for the landlord to shout at my partner for, because I tried to be as quiet as possible every night, so that he wouldn't wake up and open the door to scare the hell out of me. Flash forward a couple of months, I realize I'm pregnant. Me and the fiancé are super happy. We have some friends around one night, and the next day, we go out to tell my parents about our pregnancy. Now, before I go on, I should say that me and my fiance smoke inside on occasion, when we couldn't be bothered to go outside. I used to smoke outside the bathroom window when my partner was at work during the night shifts, so I didn't have to go out alone and risk encountering the creepy landlord. One afternoon, me and my fiance are cuddling and watching a film together. We hear a knock at the door. It's the landlord asking to empty the electric meter. It's strange considering he had only emptied it a week ago, but I couldn't tell my partner since I hid whenever the landlord came in because of how uncomfortable he had made me. I'm sitting in the living room with the door closed. It was a bit of a mess, and I hear the landlord and my fiance making small talk. But the landlord doesn't put his ladder up to get to the electric meter. I hear him starting to walk around the flat, his voice irritated and angry, and my fiance trying to stay formal and polite. I get up to stand near the door and hear better. Apparently, my fiance tells me later, the landlord had decided to do a sudden inspection of the flat. He had walked directly into the bathroom and pointed at a cigarette ash on the windowsill, not even hesitating or looking anywhere else. He walks directly into the kitchen and points at the washing up we had, saying he's not judgmental about the way we live, but it had been there for days. We were pretty unclean people back then. Before he had the chance to go any further, I opened the living room door with our contract in hand and shouted at him, reading out the part that said he wasn't allowed to enter and inspect the flat without 2 weeks' notice. He then said with the biggest shit-eating grin on his face that technically, my boyfriend had let him in, so it didn't count. We argued for a bit until he blurted out, "When was you going to tell me that you was pregnant?" I always remember the deathly silence that followed after that, only broken by me. I asked him how he knew. He told me that he had heard us talking about it. I told him that we hadn't talked about it anywhere, that he might have heard us in case he decided to evict us, knowing we would move out to find a 2-bedroom because of it eventually. He then told us that he knew because of Facebook. My privacy settings on Facebook were set to the absolute maximum. My fiance didn't allow anyone who wasn't friends with him to see his status. Later, when we attempted to look him up, he didn't even have a Facebook account. I told the landlord this, who then changed his story again and said that a friend had told him. This 40-year-old man, whom had no visitors in the 6 months that we had lived there, had a friend tell him. We got him to leave and both sat down and freaked the heck out. Even more so after realizing that he never even bothered to empty the electric meter before he left, so that had never been the reason that he had knocked in the first place. I didn't say anything, even though I knew after that the landlord had been coming in when we weren't there. My partner admitted a couple of minutes later that the landlord must have been coming in when he wasn't there. He knew where the cigarette ash was on the windowsill straight away. The bathroom window was never open much when I did smoke, since it was restricted by a child lock, and it would have looked like steam if he had looked up and saw it coming out of the window. I also never smoked out of it during the day, only at stupid times in the morning, and barely smoked at all. How had he known the washing up had been there for days? And more importantly, how in the hell did he know that I was pregnant? We figured out a way that he might have known. At your first midwife appointment, you were given books and leaflets and etc., put inside a folder to bring to other appointments. This sat on my desk in the living room, a room he hadn't entered when doing his surprise inspection. Had he gone through it? We searched for cameras in the smoke alarm and other various places in the flat, but the landlord had done the construction work himself, so we had no way of knowing about any recording hardware without breaking the place apart. We weren't able to move out until our contract allowed us to. I had to live there for a month in the early stages of pregnancy, above a man who was either entering our flat when we weren't there or recording us. We had enough evidence in our minds, but nothing solid enough to go to the cops. I kept a key in the door every night so he wouldn't be able to use his, just in case. Close to the termination date of our contract, We wrote official letters to the estate agent explaining these circumstances. We had reason to believe he was entering without our knowledge and recording us, and wrote one official letter to the landlord, posting it through his letterbox. The funny thing, he didn't confront us about it. He didn't tell us we were making stories up or lying. He just ignored us whenever we saw him. We managed to get out of the flat and move into a different one, which was also pretty crappy and had its own problems. But you want to know the most messed up part? We had all these meetings with the estate agent, told him everything that had happened, and talked about how dodgy everything to do with the flat was, the electric meter not being allowed on the internet, and the estate agent even told us that he had talked to the landlord about the allegations and that they had sorted it out, whatever that means. Once we had settled into the new flat, out of curiosity we looked online. The flat was listed under these same estate agents again. Knowing that this guy could have potentially been filming or monitoring his tenants, the estate agent still relisted the property. It scares me to this day, knowing that innocent couples like us could be moving in there, not knowing that the person below them could come and go as they please, and has no problem doing so, or could be filming them doing all sorts of things. I know this doesn't seem out there as other stories on here, but it's so real and so likely to happen to anyone that I figured it would be a good warning if anything. The most horrifying thing to me, to this day, is never knowing what was really going on, and if he hadn't confronted us, how long would we have lived there and not known our home had been violated while we weren't there? So, creepy landlord, who I'm still 90% sure to this day was filming me and my partner during the early stages of our relationship, when we were at it like rabbits. I'm not sorry if you saw my voluptuous arse or watched me take a dump. Let's not meet ever again. I grew up in Texas. I still live here along with my family that will be mentioned in this story. When the '07 recession hit, my father lost his job. It was a management job that paid well. We lived in a comfortable but slightly country area outside of Lockhart, Texas. With our income at a halt, we lost our home and had to move. My parents found a trailer park with a 2-bedroom for rent. A little cramped for our family of 5, but we had no other choice. The man we rented from was crooked for other reasons, but he's not the disturbed landlord this story revolves around. We lived in that trailer for a few years before needing to move out from reasons I was too young to remember. I was 11 years old when my parents began house hunting again. Down the road from the trailer park was a cul-de-sac of land. There is a business in the center of this land called the Why Not Party House. That was a bar or a wannabe club, I suppose. Considering I was a child, I never entered the building. There were a few houses and trailers scattered around different parts in this secluded circle. A worn-looking trailer was for rent. The man renting it, Mr. Dahl, was an elderly man who couldn't have been younger than 65 or so. A few things to note about this trailer. It had old stone steps leading up to the front door. There was a bunk bed in one of the bedrooms and a somewhat functioning air hockey table. The master bedroom had a queen-sized bed, and there was carpet in the kitchen, which I always found odd. The back door was nailed shut and completely unusable. If that wasn't enough to make you say nope, then let me also say it had a mice problem. My family is working class and my mother is disabled, and with my father out of work, we only relied on her disability check. We had no choice but to rent out this trailer or be homeless. The entire deal was strange and honestly sad that this was the position we were in. But my parents had rented out this trailer on the agreement of words only. There was no official lease that was signed or any sort of legal document that proved we were renting from this man. Before we moved into the trailer, Mr. Dahl took it upon himself to build a new deck for us to replace the old steps. He even built a little picnic table for us to sit outside. As a child, it completely blew my mind a stranger could be so kind to craft these things without being asked or wanting money. It seemed like an act of pure kindness. A bad person wouldn't do that sort of thing, right? The first few weeks of renting from him went by without a hitch. The master bedroom had no light bulbs, and we weren't there long enough to change them, so my family and I all slept in the living room. Something about the bedroom with the bunk beds seemed scary to me. I'm unsure how my brothers felt, but they never slept in there either. As I mentioned previously, we relied on my mother's disability. Sometimes we were late on rent and had to pay late fees, but other than that, Mr. Da would be very understanding about everything despite being a little irritated. My mother's check hit every first of the month, which is also the month for bills. Her, my father, and my older brother got into the car and drove into the city to take care of bills and get a money order for rent, and I was left with my oldest brother. It was a time when we had no internet or cable, just VHS movies. I was in the hallway. Come to find out, the trailer was flipped and the front door was the one nailed shut. Playing my Wii, A Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess to be exact. Something I need you all to note. We had no keys to this trailer. The only person with a set of keys was Mr. Dahl, so we were unable to ever lock the trailer when we left. As I was playing my game, right in front of the door that was locked, I saw the knob turn. No knocking. The knob jiggled and our landlord tried to pry the door open twice but was unable to do so successfully. I just froze and realized that it was him, and he must have assumed that no one was home because the car was gone. But the door was locked and I thought it was fine to continue playing my game. An 11-year-old brain. My brother was in the living room and we both heard this noise. At first I thought it was a dog barking, and my brother had heard it too. But the longer we listened, we realized it was an animal, but the sound of people yelling. My brother went to the front door to investigate the noise, and me being a scared child, I followed right behind him. Both of my parents were standing out in the yard. My mother was shouting at her landlord, who was sitting on a farming vehicle. I'm not sure what the name of it was. I remember it had a very long piece attached to it, and she was visibly angry and her voice was laced with rage. My father was yelling at him too, but I don't remember anything that was said exactly. My oldest brother asked what had happened, and here's how it goes. My parents pulled up to our trailer with the money order for rent. When they did, they caught Mr. Dahl backing up the farming vehicle against the door, the only exit in that trailer. My mother went into full protection mode knowing her 2 children were stuck inside. She confronted him immediately. Luckily, he backed away from the door, but he was still operating this farm vehicle. I believe that she threatened him. They had an exchange of words and he whipped the vehicle around fast and aggressively close to my mother, that he almost hit her with it. My parents were bewildered about what they had just witnessed. They didn't know what to do, so they called the police. When the police showed up and my parents explained the situation, it was no use because we had no legal agreement of renting out the trailer. The officer shrugged it off and said there was nothing that they could do about it, or anything because no one was injured. Apparently, trapping 2 children inside a trailer that's a fire hazard isn't illegal. We only spent one last night in that trailer. We no longer felt safe there. We packed up as many things in our car as we could, but unfortunately didn't have the money to rent a moving truck for the rest of our furniture. We stored the belongings we took with us to my grandparents' house, and we rented a motel room. It was about a week later after this happened when we tried going back for the rest of our belongings. We wanted no confrontation with Mr. Dahl, so we showed up to the trailer at night. It was dark inside and the porch light was off. My father and oldest brother went inside the trailer casually. Me and my mother and my older brother were waiting out in the car. It was no less than 5 minutes when my father and oldest brother ran out of the trailer, with speed I had never seen before. They hopped in the car and pulled out of there like some scene in an action movie, while my mom was terrified and demanding answers. Apparently, they went into the master bedroom first, which was an immediate right when you walked inside. They were going to grab a box of paperwork that we had to leave behind when we left, and they noticed something lying in the bed. Not just lying there asleep, but completely naked. It was Mr. Dahl, and right beside him was a gun. We never went back to that trailer. We never recovered the rest of our furniture that had sentimental value, was family members living and deceased. It's been almost a decade since this has happened. My mother and I discuss it every now and then, but we're thankful that time is behind us. I can't help but wonder if all that abandoned furniture was the result of some other unfortunate family who had to leave everything behind. This happened when I was a bartender about 4 years ago, but I think about it often and it has changed the way that I operate throughout life. I now refuse to go to any store alone after midnight. For these stories' sake, I will tell you that I was 25 and an attractive, slender blonde at the time. On a busy Friday night, I was bartending with the bar manager, and he had noticed that we were very low on some bar necessities after the dinner rush. Lemons, limes, bitters, that kind of thing. So I was sent out to go to a 24-hour grocery store down the road to pick up the odds and ends that we would need to get us through the weekend. I picked up everything that was asked of me without any trouble at the store, until I got to the liquor aisle. There were two country-looking guys that were probably around my age in the aisle, and they were staring at me and whispering to each other in a way that made me uncomfortable, as I assumed they were making comments about me. All pretty innocent so far. Before they could approach me, I grabbed what I needed very quickly, and I power walked to the self-checkout. I really booked it out of there because when you're a bartender, it's kind of like you are on stage, and you're required to be charming and interact with people that you otherwise absolutely wouldn't be able to tolerate unless you're getting paid to. Thus, why I'm not a bartender anymore. I get to the self-checkout and hot on my tail are the two guys. I'm scanning my stuff and they use the scanning station next to me. I get a better look at them now that they are right next to me. One is taller, muscular, and average looking. The other is shorter and more plump. They both looked dirty and their eyes were completely bloodshot. Not sure if they were high on something or had already been drinking for a while. They continued to stare at me and our eyes awkwardly met. So I did the pleasant, Midwestern-y thing to do, and flashed them a quick, insincere, closed-lip smile to be polite. The taller one starts trying to talk to me. "Hey, it looks like you're ready to party, huh?" I replied with something like, "Yeah, something like that. It's not for me, though." They walk closer to me and ignore their responsibility to scan their items. "Oh, it must be your boyfriend, huh?" I flashed the awkward, tight-lipped smile again, and I roll my eyes slightly. Like, this is your hint that I'm not interested, fellas. The taller one continues to try to talk to me. "You could come hang out with us tonight. We could show you a real good time if you know what I mean." I reply with, "No thanks, I'm good, I have plans already." Well, the tall one starts to get upset that his moves aren't working like he had hoped, and starts using a more threatening tone and moves very close to me. Like 2 inches away, but I ignore him. Stay focused on the scanner. I don't think he had showered in a few days by the smell of him. He gets a little bit louder and says, "Oh, I see how it is. You probably only get with doctors and rich men like that. You think you're too good for us. We can show you that you aren't. We can teach you a lesson." Now, I'm not sure in what context he meant, but it definitely wasn't good. Still not looking at him, I turn away so my body is blocking his view of my purse, which I had set on the scanner. I grab my 4-inch pocket knife out and slide it up my jacket sleeve, in case I need to protect myself, acting like I'm searching for my wallet. I do this, however, in view of the self-scan worker standing at her podium, and I look at her with wide eyes, trying to communicate that I do not feel safe and that I might need help. I turn back to the machine and slide my credit card to pay, while the creepy and hostile guys are practically standing on top of me. The machine malfunctions and it starts beeping. The lady comes over immediately, and the guys standing next to me change their expressions from, "I'm planning to do this to you for a couple of days and toss your body in a creek," to just your friendly good old country boys making polite conversation over here. They actually tried to act like I knew them, and that we were friends so the worker wouldn't be alerted to their ill intentions. They tried joking with the worker, saying that I was stealing something and that's why the machine went off. The worker was definitely not buying it. She was more than 6 feet tall, with some muscle on her, by the way. I wouldn't mess with her on my best day. Anyways, she presses a few buttons on the screen, shooting the guys a very unimpressed look when they were trying to act charming, and cancels the order completely. She turns to me and says, "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, ma'am. This machine seems to not be working correctly. Why don't you gather up your things and I'll ring you up at an actual register." She puts her hand on my back and gives me a wide-eyed look, like I had given her a minute earlier, letting me know that she sees I am in danger. I pick up my things to follow her to a register that is near the security office. The guys linger around the self-scan, still glaring at me, and eventually complete their purchase, but they stand at the exit, assuming that they're waiting for me. I felt like I would be walking to my death if I made my exit in that moment. The worker keeps a close eye on the guys and scans my items. As she's scanning, she tells me there wasn't actually anything wrong with the machine that I was using. It just misread my credit card. She said, "I had a bad feeling about those guys from the moment they walked in, and then I saw them getting aggressive towards you. I already rang security to be ready to walk you out to the parking lot and make sure that you can leave safely when you're ready to leave. And then I saw you take that knife out and put it up your sleeve, getting ready to protect yourself. Good girl. As much as I would like to see you show them they picked the wrong chick to mess with, I'm glad I was able to pull you aside and make sure that you're safe. I see them waiting by the door for you. I'll just keep pressing buttons on the screen and act like I'm having trouble with your order until they give up and go outside. Our security officer and I are both still going to escort you to your vehicle when you leave, though." I thought to myself, this woman seriously deserves a raise. I thanked her over and over again and told her what they said to me, and I was getting afraid because I don't know what these guys are capable of. As I'm talking to her, my bar manager calls me to see what's taking so long. I explain what was happening, and he was obviously very concerned and ready to come up there himself and kick some butt. A sweet sentiment indeed. By the time that I hang up, the guys had given up and walked out to the parking lot. The workers said that I should give it another couple of minutes because she had a feeling they might still be in the parking lot waiting for me to walk out and see which vehicle was mine, so that they could follow me. My instant thought was, no way, they have to be gone by now. I was wrong. The worker and security guard escorted me out as it was after midnight, and you can imagine how empty the parking lot was. Towards the back of the lot, there sat an old, big pickup truck running with the lights on pointed towards the store. It was a huge parking lot, and it wouldn't have made sense for them to initially park like that. So I'm assuming they moved the truck to sit that way so they had a full view of when I exited the store to go to my vehicle. It was like being stalked by very hungry lions. When I unlocked my car and they saw that me, the worker, and the guard were looking directly at them, and that I wasn't getting in my car until we watched them leave, they then peeled out of the parking lot. I mean, they seriously did a burnout to establish that they were upset and trying to intimidate us or something. Poor creeps didn't get their way. Boo-hoo. I thanked the worker and the guard over and over again, as I am certain that they had saved my life, or at least saved me from having to live with whatever those guys were planning on doing to me. I did write a long letter to the store manager and to their corporate location describing how their employees protected me and how grateful I was. I really hope that earned her a promotion, a bonus, or a raise. She didn't know me at all and was ready to protect me, which really isn't her job, but she did it anyways. Needless to say, I do not go late night shopping by myself anymore. Never will again. I've been running in these woods for as long as I can remember. but this might make me change my mind. The story began at around 6:30 p.m. I had finished eating and decided to go on a run, as usual. I always use the same path. Cross the street, run for about 1 kilometer, and pass the gate that goes into the woods. Something important to note is that the trail I use in the forest is separated about halfway through. One path is paved and the other isn't. I usually go into the unpaved path first, and then turn into the paved one after about 3 km. Nothing ever really goes wrong. I meet some rare people walking their dogs, but other than that, I'm pretty much alone. At least I thought I was. I had been running for a while when I heard a notification coming from my phone. An Airdrop notification. Since I didn't want to make it look like I was worried, I kept running for a couple of minutes and then stopped to change the music. I opened the Airdrop dreadfully. Who the heck was sending me stuff? Pretty sure that I was alone. I clicked on the drop and my heart sunk. It was a Snapchat picture of me running with the caption, "You look good." I didn't turn around. Instead, I kept running like nothing happened until I had reached a certain point. You see, the forest is surrounded by a fence to stop children from coming in unsupervised, and I didn't like that rule when I was little, so my friends and I would cut a hole in it. When I was aligned with that hole, I quickly turned and buried myself into the forest, aiming for my escape. I could hear ruffling behind me and I still didn't turn back. When I finally reached the hole, I jumped through it and absolutely booked it to the fire station that was a couple streets down. The last things I could hear when leaving the forest was an angry huff and metal meeting metal. I still don't know who it was or what they wanted from me, but I never ran in this forest again. Every summer with a few friends, we take a trip to the seaside of France for about a week. Last year, we decided to go to Hossegor on the southwestern coast to go surfing, but ended up in a small tourist village called Malais-et-Ma, an hour from where we were supposed to go because of a reservation mess up. The week was going okay until the last 3 days of the trip, but the story I'm going to tell you is from last night. So, the past 2 days we had been in trouble with the police and a few other tourists because of some misunderstandings over a pack of cigarettes. We had spent the last 2 nights stressing and trying to cool things off, and therefore, we thought the last night we were spent there couldn't be as bad as those 2, and it couldn't possibly be as if we were leaving the next day, very early in the morning, so we had only planned to go to a restaurant for dinner with some close friends that we had met there to celebrate the trip. The dinner was going great. We were all having fun, and as time passed by, it started getting dark. Towards the end of the meal, my best friend Dennis, who was driving us home the next day, thought it was best for him to leave early and not drink too much, so we could sleep as soon as possible and be in the best shape for the long drive that was coming. He left about 15 minutes before the rest of the group, while we stayed and drank a bit more. We paid the check, and as soon as I got up from my chair, I received a message from Dennis. "Call me. There's a guy following me." Here's what happened. Dennis had to pass through a caravan parking lot and take off to get back to the residence in which we had rented a house. While he was in the parking lot, he noticed someone behind him that was about his size, with a hood and a cap on. At first, he didn't think anything of him, as the village was actually quite touristy, and there were a lot of people usually passing by the parking lot. But when Dennis stopped to take a pee on the tree, he had a glimpse of the guy behind him stopping and hiding behind another tree a few feet back. And as soon as he got to walking again, the guy stepped up from behind the tree and started following him again up to the Gulf. As Dennis got there, he was a bit creeped out, especially since at night, the Gulf is completely dark, only lit by the moonlight and empty of people, He stopped again for a second to light a cigarette and checked if the guy was still behind him. Once again, the guy stepped out of the path and hid behind a tree until Dennis started walking again. That's when he understood that he was in danger. The guy wasn't physically imposing, and so Dennis thought that it was weird that he was so confident in following him. Maybe because he was holding a knife or a gun. Nevertheless, Dennis kept walking and acting as if he hadn't noticed anything, although the guy was following him again and sent me the message, "Call me, there's a guy following me." As soon as I had picked up, he talked loudly to try and scare off the guy by saying, "Hey, you're at the golf with the other 8. No problem, I'll be there in a minute." Even though there were only 5 of us and absolutely not at the golf, which was terrifying for me. But it was clever because it made me understand he wasn't joking and where he was. I swore to him that everything was going to be okay, that we would be there in 5 minutes, and told him to be careful and safely try to make it home. As soon as I hung up, I started running towards the golf and explained very briefly to my friend that Dennis was in trouble, and that we had to get there as soon as we could. Meanwhile, when I had hung up, Dennis put the phone back in his pocket and kept walking. He took a glance back and saw the guy was still a few meters behind him. He took a last puff of his cigarette that he had lit 2 minutes before, and then threw it and started running towards the residence. As he was running, he took a look back and saw the guy started running too. It lasted for about 5 minutes before he got in front of our house, which was empty. When he got there, he stopped for a second, looked back one last time. The guy was about 10 meters behind him, in the middle of the alley, immobile, and then went to hide behind one of the cars that were on the east side of it. As soon as Dennis saw that, he panicked and he barged into the house, locked the door with difficulty, grabbed the biggest kitchen knife he could find in the house, and he waited on the couch facing the entrance to the house, which was a glass canopy. When me and my friends got there, he was scared but unhurt. He explained everything to us, and then we went looking for the guy in a group of 4. The neighbors hadn't seen anyone other than us, and even though we got to the residence at first in separate groups at different times, and through the 2 different entrances, we didn't see anyone coming out of them. He had completely disappeared. Nothing was stolen, even though we had left clothes to dry outside of the house, and nobody was hurt, so we didn't call the police. But we warned the neighbors, and me and the 2 others stayed up all night outside to look out for the guy, as he had seen where we lived and we were afraid he would return during the night. Dennis had been lucky. We never knew what were the intentions of this guy, or if he was hiding something that gave him the advantage over my friend. Furthermore, he didn't even try to get into the house, and it's good for Dennis because there was another entrance to the house. Another glass canopy that led to one of our friends' room, and which at the time had not been correctly closed. We couldn't even understand what he did. If he wanted to steal from Dennis or attack him, he could have done it 2 separate times, when he went to the bathroom and when he lit a cigarette, but he didn't. So what did he want? Who was he and where did he go? I don't think we'll ever get an answer. We can only hope he never did anything to anyone and he was arrested if he did. We didn't call the cops back then because we had had trouble with them the past 2 days because of the problem with the pack of cigarettes I mentioned before. Also, after those 3 days that had gone wrong, we just wanted it to end, to go home and sleep. I regret not calling them now that I think about it, but it's too late now, and I hope this guy hasn't been creeping on anybody since. We were all absolutely tired the next day, and the drive that was supposed to be about 5 or 6 hours took 10 hours to complete under the heavy summer heat. Hey, but we all got home safely. We slept well, and never had any problems of that sort since, and now we can all laugh about it. And to conclude, I would advise you to never walk alone at night in places that you don't know much about. There are crazy and weird people everywhere, and a calm night can quickly turn to a nightmare if you don't watch out. First off, this story happened almost 10 years ago. I'll jump right in because it's long. I got home from work one day and logged into Facebook to find a message from someone I didn't know. It was too long ago to remember verbatim what was said, but it was along the lines of, "Hey, I know you have no idea who I am, but I've been trying to decide what to do for a few days and I figured I would let you know what's been going on. Someone has been catfishing me using your identity for over 2 years, and I just found out about it last week." The sender of the email was clearly pretty shaken up and understandably was experiencing a mix of emotions. According to her, she had met the imposter online a little over 2 years prior to her writing this, and that they had been engaged in a pretty intimate, long-distance relationship for a majority of that time. The imposter had created a Facebook and had over time reposted almost all my photos with their own captions on them, including a good amount of art that I had drawn that they took credit for too. They created fake profiles for a good amount of my close family and friends so they could comment on the photos of themselves to make the profile seem more legit. The funniest part to me is that although most things in my real life seemed to be mirrored in this fake profile, I, a straight male, was instead portrayed as trans. I think the main reason for this was that the sender of the email and the imposter would actually speak on the phone, and the imposter turned out to be a female in the end, and therefore needed a reason to justify her more feminine sounding voice. The sender of the email was justifiably both angry and creeped out, and wanted to find the catfish. She started asking me a lot of questions about my life, but phrasing them like, "Is your sister's name blank? And did you go to blank high school?" Some of them were clearly information that anyone could glean from a quick browse of my profile. But then she asked, "Is your best friend blank?" Which struck me as odd since, despite this person actually being my closest friend, and who I spent the most time with, we have barely any Facebook photos together, and most are from a long time ago. And then she asked, "Were you adopted, and are your half-siblings' names blank and blank?" Which sealed the deal for me since I knew for a fact that I had never posted about being adopted online. The sender of the email already had an idea that this person had known me in real life, but this confirmed it for me. The sender of the email had contacted me shortly after confronting the imposter for the first time. My guess after 2 years, they had finally become suspicious of the fact that the imposter wouldn't show their face. I have no idea how long it took them to figure out that they were being played, but I'm glad they finally decided to give the ultimatum of "show your face or I'm cutting you off." I'm pretty sure this is the point where the imposter admitted to being a catfish, and that she had been using the identity of someone she had a crush on in high school before hanging up. I was given the URL so I could look through the profile myself, which was up for about 2 days after I saw it before it was all removed. This was definitely really bizarre. The imposter had posted more than I ever had on Facebook, and it genuinely seemed like they had lived a pretty involved double life online as me. Almost everyone I had posted photos with on my real profile would have their own fake profiles created that had enough content to be convincing though they could be tagged in and validate these new photos. Some of these profiles seem to have gone and made their own real friends as well, and I wondered if any of those were used to facilitate even more online dating deception. Either way, the amount of time that this person had spent fabricating their alter ego's online presence, it was pretty shocking. The whole time I had been crawling down the Facebook rabbit hole, the sender of the email was looking through my real profile. After a while, she sent me a message saying, "Did you take these photographs?" and showed me what I remember as a black and white photo of a barn or something. I hadn't, which was weird since everything else on the fake profile originated with me, and she had noticed the discrepancy. We both tried reverse image searching with no luck, and then either through a stroke of genius or somewhat suspiciously, I really couldn't tell, She thought to flip the fake number the imposter had written into the fake Facebook profile around in reverse, and a Google search came up with a landline that belonged to the home address of a girl that I had gone to high school with. Real me was Facebook friends with real imposter's profile, so we both went snooping around and found the photo that she had claimed I had taken, which pretty much confirmed to me that this was the imposter. I'm pretty sure there were more indicators to the sender as well, but I can't remember. I thought about messaging her for a while, but decided that it probably wouldn't lead to anything good. At the time, my thoughts were definitely, let's not meet. I talked a few times with the sender of the email just to try and decompress a bit, but honestly, I just wanted to distance myself from the situation, and also had my suspicions about the sender as well. I figured maybe it was the imposter's last-ditch effort to try and talk to me. Although when it was all over, the sender seemed to be eager to leave this all behind as well, so maybe not. Either way, it was a really strange experience. I felt mostly freaked out and violated, but I guess there was a small part of me that was flattered by it. I had a lot of mixed emotions. The weirdest part to me is that I'm a really approachable person, and I would have definitely been willing to talk and probably be friends if this person had just approached me instead. Although, I'm still not sure if this was done out of an obsession for me, or if this person felt like I was just a suitable image to base the fabricated persona off of. I remember talking to her probably twice throughout high school, and really didn't have a very good idea of who she was other than a quiet hipster girl. If either person involved hears this, I would definitely be happy to talk now. It's been years, but I've gone from being very put off to always wondered why this person chose me over a myriad of other more attractive or interesting people online to base their other life off of. According to the sender who had contacted me, she had probably spent more time online pretending to be me than she actually did going about her own life. I have a tumultuous history of addiction, and I have had plenty of my own escapes, which is why it's always fascinated me that someone would want to pretend to live someone else's life as a means of doing that, because at the end of the day, the person pretending to be me had no idea that I spent my time daydreaming of being a different person as well. I guess it just goes to show that no matter how much you wish you were someone else, chances are that person has plenty of their own reasons to want to escape their own demons, for their own reasons. For anyone still interested, I recently spoke to a good friend who told me that, while they don't know the perpetrator personally, they do know they identify as non-binary now, which to me sort of confirms my suspected motive, which was to explore their sexuality through another identity to one degree or another, but I'll probably never know for sure. This was 2004 when I was 20 and living in a small 2-level apartment on the main floor of a building. Out front, there were 3 stairs, then a deck, then 3 more stairs to the front door, and another little narrow deck that ran the length of the front of my apartment, which besides the door was all windows. The main floor was a tiny kitchen, living room, and a door to the hallway for laundry and parking access, all of which is totally visible from the windows. It was fall in Western Canada during daylight savings, pitch black early and surprisingly warm for the season. I had all my windows open and hadn't closed the blinds as to get a breeze in, and I was talking on the phone to my sister. I had my back to the windows, and when I turned around, I thought I saw something weird at the window. It was really bright inside, so I turned the main light off, and I see a man pressed against the window staring at me. I screamed and told my sister a man is on my deck looking at me. He seemed to take off into the darkness. I turned off all the lights inside, put the outside ones on, and I was babbling to my sister like holy crap, a Peeping Tom, so scary that I couldn't believe it. And then he just walks back up to the deck. I screamed again, "He's back, I have to call 911. I hung up and did. And while this face was pressed against the window, it was still open. The windows were floor to ceiling, with screened crank-open bottom sections that I had opened to the max, and could for sure accommodate a determined person crawling in. He could hear me in the 911 call, but he didn't move. I had crouched down in the dark room when the main light was off, so he couldn't see me, but I had the lights on beside the door to the hallway and down these stairs to the bedroom. I didn't want to move and let him know where I was. I should have ran into the hall and banged on a neighbor's door, but I was in shock, and after all the cops are coming from a station 10 blocks away, they gotta be here soon, right? The 911 operator said, "We can't find your address." "I'm directly behind the rec center at X and Y, corner unit, unmistakable area landmark, in the only apartment building there." The man at the window starts banging on the glass. I was whispering, but I assumed he heard me give panic directions repeatedly, and we both can hear sirens. They had felt like this would go on forever when he finally just ran off. I couldn't see far and there were plenty of places to crouch and hide, so I was not at all sure. I peek out to see a police car, so I told the operator that they're here, and then the car starts to drive away, and the operator told me to go outside and flag them down. I don't know why I actually did, because I was scared out of my mind, but when I did, they rolled down their window. "Ma'am, do you need help?" "Oh, you're looking for me, I think. I called 911. We're just driving, but what's your problem?" They never found the man that terrified me and made me feel so unsafe that I moved. But it was truly the cops not being able to find me on the apartments behind a notable building that completely shook me. The frightening end note is when I moved out, they tried to charge me because the downstairs screens are shredded from your cats. The screens were pristine the day the creeper showed up, and that was the last time I opened the downstairs windows or blinds or used the front door. The property manager laughed and mocked me and called BS when I said someone cut them up until I showed her the police report. She lived there too, so it was suddenly not so funny. For context, I am 20 years old. I live in the suburbs and a small residence of 6 houses. My gate is very often broken, including today. That means about 80% of the time it is wide open, so everyone can fit into the small courtyard. My house has 1 floor and there are 4 bedrooms including mine, and downstairs there's a guest bedroom, which is used as a treatment room because I have big health concerns. This is where all the equipment, the medicines are stored, like morphine and doses that could really get you, and this is where the care takes place. I also have a dog, and I'm very close to him. He's a little bit of all my life. He feels everything to the point of feeling my epileptic seizures before they happen, to recognize the nurses who are arriving. He recognizes it by the sound of their tires when they arrive in the yard. He never barks except when there is a problem. And finally, a nurse spends 4 to 5 times a day to give me care at home, including infusions. This is important for the story. That morning, like every morning, my nurse arrived at 8 a.m. For the rest of the day, I'll call her Sandra. She takes care of me as usual. That is to say, an infusion of a painkiller. She replaces the antibiotic diffusers. She makes me a blood test and remakes the cassette of my morphine pump. We usually chat about everything and nothing. She tells me stories with patients during the treatment. My nurses are an integral part of my life. They've looked after me for 6 years now. She leaves after 40 minutes and says to me, "See you later. I'm sure that I'll be a little bit late, but don't worry." That day, I have a medical appointment in the morning, and I'm alone all day because my parents are working, except the nurses that pass by every 4 hours. Once I'm back from my meeting, I sit on the sofa with my dog while waiting for my nurse. After a while, I hear the tire noises, and I get up because I think it's the nurse. But my dog has started to growl behind the door. I look at the time, 11:50 a.m. I tell myself that this is a bit early, but something instead of going after her. My nurse exchanges me with the patient from before. I hear a knock at the door. Surprised, I go to open it. Usually the nurses come in like that. And I see a young woman standing whom I've never seen before. She said to me, "Hello, are you?" "I'm Camille, a third-year nursing student. Your nurse is gonna be a little bit late, so she told me to come here and start preparing before she gets here." I wasn't wary at all. I was used to students coming in, but I'm just a little surprised that Sandra didn't warn me, because usually she warns me in the morning or she'll send me a message, and then she never leaves a student alone when it's the first time we see each other. I tell myself that she must have just forgotten to tell me. I bring her in and I show her the way to the treatment room. She takes out the things for treatment while she washes her hands. My dog is being weird. He growls at her as soon as she approaches me, and he turns around to me. I was embarrassed, so I left him in the living room, and I closed the door to quiet things down. I really didn't care what she was doing. I just let her do it, and I was on my phone at the moment. She begins to put the IV on the infusion stand and takes a syringe. Normally, we'll rinse my central catheter with a syringe of phi serum already made. You just have to open the packaging. And there I see it's not a pre-made syringe, but a syringe that she has prepared. I look up and see that my ampoules for my treatments are intact and have not been opened. Yet I hear the sound of ampoules breaking. I'm starting to think that this is weird. And there, she starts to approach me to inject the syringe, when I get a message from my nurse. "I'll be there in 5 minutes. Can you start pulling out the material?" Oh my gosh, my blood is only one run for one spin. I got up and said, I gotta go to the bathroom, it's happening." I ran and locked myself in the downstairs bathroom. The whole time my dog was barking and growling. When I opened the door, he followed me straight up, so we were both in the bathroom. So I sent a message to my nurse. "There is a student named Camille, don't worry." And then she replied, "Who?" I started crying in the bathroom and I was really scared. Camille, who came and said, "Is everything okay?" I think she could see that I was staying in there a long time. I said, Yes, it's going to happen." And then I heard my front door slammed. 2 minutes later, I hear it reopen, but I hear my nurse. I came out of the toilet crying. She asked me what had happened. I told her about it and showed the treatment room. So we called the police. They came, they examined, they took samples, the syringe and the rest of what Camille had prepared. The test results were received a few days after receiving the products in the syringe and the infusion. In the syringe was a paralyzer. She had put a dose that could have paralyzed a man. And in the IV, it was a medicine to lower the heart rate, but it was so concentrated that it could have stopped anyone's heart. Today, we still don't know who Camille is, and luckily, I never heard from her again. I specify that she did steal all the opioids, but no other things like my tablet, which was on my bed, or my computer, which was in the living room. In retrospect, I realized that my dog had sensed that this person didn't want me well, and I tell myself that I should have watched her because she was just a student, and that my treatments are not like that. And I keep wondering what could have happened if I hadn't looked at my phone. As for now though, I'm just going to try to stay vigilant and make sure I pay more attention to what is going on around me. And I'll probably try to listen to my dog a little bit more as well. Animals always seem to know who's a good person or a bad person. When I was around 8 years old, we moved into a new house. It wasn't old, but it was a fairly new built house, either maybe built around the 60s. Everyone got their own room, and this was the first time I was on my own. I thought I was a big shot. A little background on myself. I would like to call myself somewhat sensitive. Ever since I was a child, I could always feel the sense of something or someone around when no one else could. Fast forward to when I was 9, it was the first year in the house. I could feel the presence of something in there, but I never really thought anything of it, considering it wasn't too negative. There were 3 rooms that I didn't really like being in, because the energy felt somewhat dark. The basement, the bathroom, and the attic. I didn't mind being in the basement when I had friends over, but when I was alone, I couldn't be in there for more than 5 minutes without getting the feeling like I was being watched. In the bathroom was a cabinet that was very deep. You could literally fit 2 grown men in there. I never understood why it was so big. But I didn't feel right, and I wouldn't often feel drawn to just look inside and stare for a few minutes, and I would get a very uneasy feeling. The attic, on the other hand, was a different story. I never ever opened it. I kept the door shut at all times. Something was up there and it didn't want company. One night, I was laying in bed. It was around 2:45 in the morning when I heard footsteps in the hallway. I assumed it was just one of my brothers coming home from a night out with friends. My bedroom door was open, so I looked to see if anyone was walking around. I stared for about what seemed like 10 minutes and no one went by. I got scared, so I decided to wait it out. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I thought I saw the shape of a human in the corner of my bedroom. I thought that it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, so I tried to turn over and go back to sleep, but I felt like I was being watched. Now, in a 9-year-old's mind, it's the boogeyman, so I quickly hopped out of my bed and tried to run into my mom's room. Her room was only 2 doors down from mine. In order to walk out of my room, you would have to pass a wall that was somewhat slanted. In order to do this, you would have to walk sideways. As I did this, I felt 2 hands pressed down on my shoulders. I froze in fear. I couldn't move, I couldn't scream. I was a prisoner to my own body. Then all of a sudden, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. In my ear, clear as day, I heard heavy breathing. It didn't sound human. My eyes widened, and then I felt the pressure lift off of me. I could move again. I ran so fast down the small hallway into my mother's bed. That whole night, I kept hearing someone walking back and forth in the hallway, but I refused to look through the doorway. When I tell you that I didn't sleep well that night, I mean I didn't sleep that week. The next morning, I walked into the hallway and just so happened to look up. The door to the attic was open. I asked Mom if she was up in the attic, and she said that there was no reason that it should have been open. My stomach felt like it was in my throat. I knew what was ever in that attic was in my bedroom the night before, just watching me. I'm thankful that I got up out of bed when I did, because if I didn't, I don't want to think what would have happened. I'm 22 now, and I still can remember that night as if it were yesterday, and I still can't sleep with the lights off. So, to whoever or whatever grabbed my shoulders that night, stay away from me. I was 11 at the time and living in a nice suburban area. We had recently moved into this house that my parents had built, and it was our first home, versus renting a house in a sketchy area. It was a very nice neighborhood. The whole family made friends quickly with a lot of the neighbors, but especially the one 3 doors down. They had a daughter my age, and I'm a male by the way, and a daughter 5 years younger, which was the same age as my sister. My parents got along well, and we began hanging out quite a bit, for barbecues at their house or parties at ours. Friendships were formed quickly, and it seemed to be very strong. After a year or so, I started realizing things weren't what they seemed. I remember seeing police cars at their house a few times in the evenings, and when I would ask my parents what was going on, it was always nothing, just checking in on them type of answers. I was no genius, but at 11, that didn't add up. Why did the cops just come and check up on us? One day, I'm at their house playing and hanging out, and the daughter goes across the street to get another mutual friend, which left myself and the father alone in the house. This was really no big deal as it had happened before, but then he approached me and just seemed off. I still don't know what made me feel this way, but I was very uncomfortable and started thinking about leaving. About 5 minutes later, he tells me that he has something cool to show me. I don't remember what it was, but I think it was something about baseball cards, which I was very fond of. I excitedly started following him. He pulled the attic ladder down and asked me to follow him, which I did without hesitation at first. And then something happened and I still can't process what it was. He was ahead of me on the ladder, and when he looked back to help me into the attic, there was something off. Something about his eyes. His face, his grin. It wasn't right. It looked evil. I can still see it as clear as day and can't recognize exactly what it was that set my alarms off. Whatever it was plenty, because I jumped off the ladder and ran out of the door. I sprinted all the way home, and I was choking back tears when I busted through my front door. Mom was there when I came through and could see that I was obviously out of sorts, and immediately started calming me down. As I came to my senses, I explained what happened. My mom was concerned with how scared I was, but mostly brushed it off to me being scared, young, and silly. I kid you not. That same exact night, I was awoken up at around 3 a.m. It was my mom sitting on my bed, and as I awoke, she held me like a baby. I remember how she smelled and how tightly she held me, and I remember her tears hitting my cheek. Eventually, I saw out the window to the neighbor's house. It was surrounded by police and fire trucks. The neighbor's dad had killed himself and his daughter in the attic after his standoff with the police. There isn't a doubt in my mind, nor my mother's, that would have been me if I had made it into the attic. I still get chills thinking about it. Okay, so around 9 or 10 years ago, I was living with my mom, dad, and older sister in an oldish house in a very small village. Like, when I say small, I mean its only main feature was a small church and a few scattered houses, occupied mostly by very old people. At the time, it was the summer, so I wasn't at school or anything, and since we were far in the middle of nowhere, I spent most of that time at home, glued to one screen or another. The usual routine was I would wake up at around 10 or 11. By this point, mom, dad, and my sister had all left for work, so I had the house for myself. I would go downstairs and make some toast and watch some random stuff on TV for around an hour before heading back to my room to continue with whatever game I was grinding through that particular day. The usual habits of a 17-year-old guy cut off from the world by many, many fields. I should give a quick rundown of our house. It was an older cottage with 2 rooms upstairs, mine and my sister's, and everything else downstairs. As you walk up the stairs, you got to a very small landing and could go either left to my room or immediately right to my sister's. Basically, the way that this was laid out was that I could sit in my room with the door open, and my sister's room is directly opposite. I should also mention that these ceilings in both our bedrooms were slanted. We were basically in a large attic where the roof slanted down. Because of where these slant met the wall, we had a crawl space that ran the length of the house on either side of the rooms, both with a small door to access them. They were mostly used for storing normal attic stuff, like Christmas decorations and old, forgotten toys. The doors to these were thin little things, about 4 feet tall with a small handle on the outside. This is important because turning these tiny doorknobs opened them, but only from the outside. If the door was pushed shut with you inside, there was no way back out. I discovered this myself on more than one occasion. The door on my side ran along my room, and along one wall in my sister's room, and hers ran along the other side along my room. This space was not very big. You had to crouch to stand in it, and most of the time that you were in there, you were crawling on hands and knees. This is all important later, I promise. Anyway, this one morning, I'm awoken to a familiar noise. Some sort of a small creature rustling around in the crawl space on my sister's side. I could hear this because my bed was against the wall that ran along it. Not an unusual sound. Living in the countryside, we had mice almost constantly, and pretty much had the run of these storage spaces, no matter how many traps were put down. I thought nothing of it and got up and went off to begin my morning ritual of toast and television. The first odd thing I noticed was while watching TV, I could hear movement upstairs. My sister's room was directly above the living room, so I assumed she had just not gone to work that day for whatever reason, and continued eating. Around an hour or so later, I went back upstairs and I booted up my PC. And as I was waiting, I turned around to my open door and faced my sister's closed one and realized that it was late in the day and she had not yet left her room. An odd thing since she normally parked up on the sofa in the living room on her days off and didn't move until our parents returned. We're not the most active family. I started to think that maybe she was at work, and I had imagined the noise from upstairs. But as I mused this, I noticed the crack of light at the bottom of her door, as a shadow passed by it. Okay, so there's definitely someone in there, so it must be her, right? I once again pushed it from my mind and went back to my PC. More time passed and the thought came back to me. Why would she be at home but not leave? She only has a small television in her room and no books, so what had she been doing in there all day? I glanced back around and again saw a shadow under the door. She was still moving around in there, so what was up? I finally decided to go knock on her door. I knocked a few times and said her name. No answer. Weird, maybe she had headphones on or something. I knocked a bit harder again and said her name again, but louder. No answer. Alright, I thought, screw this. I'm just going to go in, so I cracked the door open and peered around. I found an empty room. No one inside at all. Feeling slightly confused, but better that it was just my imagination, I stepped in properly and looked around and saw something that made me full-on panic. Near the bottom of her little door leading to the crawl space, there was a small hole that the mice had made to get in and out at the bottom. Really small, but just big enough to fit half of your hand through. There, coming through that hole, were 4 fingers, holding the door shut from the inside. At first I thought, no, it can't be fingers, don't be stupid, until I watched them slowly creep back through the hole into the crawl space. I lost my crap, very quietly though I might add. I backed out of the room, shutting the door behind me, and ran to my room. Being the stupid teenager I was, I grabbed what might be the most imposing weapon that I could find. A fake Winchester rifle cap gun I got from Disneyland a few years back. I figured that if whoever was hiding in that bedroom didn't believe it was a real firearm, I could at least hit them with it. I ran off downstairs to where my dogs were on the far side of the house and called my mom, who worked about only 5 minutes away from where we lived. She told me to stay put and that her and her manager were on their way. And this time, I had made a small upgrade from my fake plastic rifle to one of my dad's golf clubs. I felt much better with that. Finally, my mom and her boss, John, turned up and I tell them everything leading up to this point. They say okay and that we're all set off upstairs to investigate. Me rather unheroically bringing up the rear with my golf club. We get into my sister's room and I point to the door. I'll never know if my mom is just hard as nails or massively stupid, but while John and I watch, she marches over to the door, yanks it open and sticks her head in. A moment passes while she looks left and right and John and I are preparing to yank her back from the clutches of the psycho hobo murderer hiding in there before she shouts, "Chris, What the heck are you doing in there? Get out. A small amount of backstory. Chris was my sister's boyfriend. Unbeknownst to me, the night before, my dad had asked Chris to leave as he had stayed with us for around 5 days at this point. He said sure, that's cool, and as far as my mom and dad knew, he had headed home. What really happened was, instead of leaving, him and my sister had planned to make it seem like he had left, and then he could stay another night. He then would wake up before my mom shouted my sister up for work, like she did every morning, and he would hide in the crawl space and sleep there until everyone had left for the day. One small hitch in the plan was that they didn't think of was, you guessed it, me. They had forgotten that I was home, and conveniently sat directly opposite the only exit for most of the day, so he was pretty much trapped. When I knocked, he had hid himself behind the door and held it shut to prevent being locked in. Anyway, my mom swiftly told him to get the heck out and to not come back. Sadly, this was not the last time we saw the guy. As it turned out, he had stolen quite a bit of money from my sister's room while he had been hiding out. And then, because my sister makes terrible decisions, got her pregnant and proceeded to smash windows trying to get at her and the baby around a year later. For a while, we lived in the same city when I went to university, and he was spending time at the prison there for stabbing someone in a completely different town. He's definitely a super guy. Oh, and a small topper to all of this. As I had mentioned earlier, the only rooms upstairs are mine and my sister's bedrooms. He had been in there for close to 14 hours with no access to a toilet. But no worry for this guy, because he had a lot of empty bottles to piss in, which he kindly left behind for us to all clean up. And finally, around a year later, as Mom was getting the Christmas decorations out, which were at the far back of the storage space, she found a small bag filled with crap. I should mention, where she found it is exactly next to where my bed is on the other side of the wall. The rustling that woke me up that day, it was him, hiding his crap amongst our tinsel and tree. So, sister's baby daddy who hid in our crawl space and used it as a private bathroom. That's not me, yeah. This is actually my friend's story, but I was almost a daily guest at her house, so I think I might be able to tell it like she would. She lived at her parents' house. We were around 18 years old, and they had just moved into a big house from a small apartment. They had a dog who was extremely well behaved, but sometimes in the middle of the night he would start growling and barking. One early morning, my friend's dad followed the dog to the kitchen where he saw a young man trying to get in through the window. The man got away before the police got there, but the growling and barking didn't stop. And sometimes we could all hear weird sounds, like someone was walking around on the roof of our house or something. Her dad would often have to look up into the attic and would see nothing, so he blamed those sounds on the weather. Changes in the heat or cold and humidity making the wood crack. This went on for a few years. A few nights a week, the dog would growl and they would hear what sounded like footsteps. I spent some nights there, and one time my friend woke me up just to make me listen. Years later, and a few years after my friend moved out from her parents' place, her dad was doing something in the attic when he found a tiny little door in the far corner. He had never noticed it before because this corner of the attic was really dark. He opened the tiny little door, and what he saw in the beam of his flashlight really freaked everyone out. He saw a dirty mattress, some burnt out candles, and candy wrappers. It's been years since she had told me about what her father saw, but I still get goosebumps thinking about it. Someone had actually been living in their attic. Maybe it was the guy who tried to climb in through the window. I consider most of 1996 to be a rebuilding year in my life. I was 25, fresh out of a relationship that had crashed and burned right before the wedding. So deep was the crater and widespread fallout that I had to move to a different state to avoid my to-be father-in-law's friends and law enforcement, who were making sure that I spent time roadside with them at least 4 times in the first 2 months after it all ended. I started over in a new place with a lack of resources and connections that were going to make it hard to get back into shape before I turned 30. Still, I was free and beholden to no one but my creditors, so I had that going for me. I lived in my means and rented a townhouse and a long row of properties in a less than reputable part of town. I didn't have time to do a walkthrough before I moved in. In fact, I rented the place unseen based on the online advertisement. It was close to the job, which was great because someone had trashed my car the week before I moved out, and I ended up driving a beat-up Dodge pickup that I bought with the last of my savings. Once settled, I was locked into the rental for 12 months, which oddly enough gave me a sense of permanence in my new surroundings and helped me get to work on my new life and career in human capital management and training services. My unit was at the end of the block of 12 with 2 bedrooms up top with a master bath and a half bath in the living area. It was not a massive space, but it felt empty for lack of any furniture. I slept on an inflatable mattress for the first 3 months and used folding chairs and a card table to eat and watch television. The block was a place where people were either on their way up or back down, young kids in their first home, recently divorced with kids, the downturned from society in one way or another. There were fights, domestic and otherwise, throughout the night. Drunken parties and birthday galas took over the block on weekends, but nobody ever interacted with other families for some reason. No one knew anyone else's name or business. At least that's what the cops told me the first time they stopped by to ask me if I heard or witnessed something going on in the block. My immediate neighbors were just weird, like a space monkey on your lawn inviting you to a probe kind of weird. It was a circus of 3. The short, wild-haired woman looked like an off-brand troll doll, with big pink hair that defied logic, and a malfunctioning soundboard that only shrieked when provoked. The tall, thin man looked like an average bald human might appear in an elongating funhouse mirror. I don't know how old they were, but they resembled old, well-worn furniture, like the contents of an elderly couple's storage locker, old and ready to be discarded. The troll doll lady and funhouse man were not fond of talking to neighbors or anyone. They were troubled people. Their fights would bleed through the shared walls and get louder when talking outside. They knocked my only hanging art from the wall when one threw the other against the other side. Funhouse man liked to take his morning coffee in the sunshine, standing behind the screen of his front door in tidy whities and an oversized flannel shirt. He was often the first person I would encounter in the morning on my way to work, and he would stare off across the playground into the woods, as if in a trance long before I left the townhouse, and probably long after my truck took me away. The cops knew them by their real names. There had been a child living there, but he or she had been removed from the home. A frequent guest in their little David Lynch sitcom world was a guy named Chuck, so named because a troll doll lady would yell his name every 10 minutes anytime he was in the house. Chuck was a long-haul trucker who parked his sleeper rig across the street every couple of weeks. For some reason, he didn't shower inside, so Saturday mornings he would often run the garden hose over the fenced-in area in the back to take a cold shower, which was a lovely sight the first time I didn't know what was going on. He sometimes walked out back to take a long beer piss in the runoff drain. His aversion to indoor plumbing was never explained to me, but I am forever grateful I never walked out back to catch him popping a squat in the tree line. For about 6 months, I tolerated the noise, let the neighbors be the bad guys, and called the police when the fights went too loud for too long, or when they all got drunk and played their 80s punk records through the night, and engaged in the song of the people howling at the moon. I got to a place where I was making enough money to buy real furniture or rent out a better place. I still had a lease to honor, so I bought a sofa, a real bed, and a desk set for an office. It was still a minimalist affair, but comfortable. The townhouse felt like my home for once, and suddenly, the intrusions from my neighbors were twice as annoying. One night, a troll doll lady got into a fight with the pizza delivery driver, who knocked on her door by mistake but wouldn't give her the pizza. I only know this because the pizza and its box hit my front window at different spots. The shrieking, pink-haired witch attacked the driver, which led to a light show by police that rivaled a Mannheim Steamroller Christmas show. I was left to clean the pizza off the window and call the office to replace the window. They refused until the neighbors agreed to pay, so I enjoyed a cracked window for a month before the court accepted her guilty plea over the property damage. Her arrest was around the same time residents on our block, and the next one over, began reporting burglaries, and I was asked by police if I had any information or experienced anything odd. Other than the 3 Geek Circus next door, I told them I did not. Fortunately, my work and social life were on the rebound. I met a girl and we hit it off, though we stayed far from my house during the early part of our relationship. So I began spending more time away from home, though I would often come home late at night as the neighbors were in a loud state of either bliss or rage. During the day, maintenance worked to replace the insulation and update the HVAC system along the attic spaces along the entire block. I didn't think much about it because the work was done while I was gone in the daytime, and I assumed the property managers would be coming into my place at some point to access my attic. Probably the last one, as they started on the far end for mine. Quickly, I lost track of the project. One night, I came home and something felt a little off. The front door was locked, the windows intact, and the back door secured. However, it felt and even smelled a little off. Sometimes, I could smell the tobacco and weed upstairs when it filtered up and over the attic space, but I was sure someone had been there. I cleared the house in a short, quiet march, as my dad, a Marine, had taught me, but found no one and nothing missing. My computer, 2 TVs, everything were intact. Except, I went to grab a beer from the fridge to calm my nerves and found a 6-pack missing. I was sure I had 2 scratchback stout packs from my last visit to Stewie's microbrew. The loaf of bread seemed to be a little shorter than the morning before, by several slices. I couldn't be sure, but I thought I might be missing some other items as well, but wasn't sure if that was just the growing anxiety over being robbed. I wondered if maintenance had been by to inspect the window, or work in the attic and help themselves to a snack and drink. It would explain the musty smell in my apartment, and given the people I knew who owned and managed the property, it wouldn't surprise me if a couple of their day laborers took a load off for a bit. And this smell was most present upstairs, but in my office, which was opposite the neighbor's wall, so it wasn't lingering too bad. It was clearly Jim Funk. I immediately assumed laborer because it made the most sense, so I didn't report it to the police that night. The next morning, however, I discovered my medications missing from my cabinet. All of them. My Lexapro, my emergency anxiety meds, and my other bottles were gone. I checked the windows and doors again, now in a near panic. I called off work for the first time using a burglary as my excuse. I was the 7th house in 2 townhouse blocks to be hit in the past 2 weeks, the 5th in my block, and one of the 5 without signs of forced entry. The police wouldn't tell me much about the other incidents and didn't seem to believe that I locked my doors until I reminded them who I lived next to. By that point, I really didn't want to live in that place anymore. It no longer felt like home. I was sharing it with something I felt lingered in the air around me. There was a feeling of dread, a sense of violation knowing there was someone out there who was inside your life without permission. Once removed, it feels like living in a house without walls. And there was a serial burglar in the neighborhood, where the cops traditionally left to work out its own problems and carry away the remains. A week after the break-in, a few things happened to mess up my world even further. First, a troll doll lady returned home and, because she was on house arrest, a welcome party brought out all the freaks Friday night. Second, because I was an idiot, I had to come home and pick up a few things I needed to spend the weekend with my new girlfriend. As she was already in the truck and we were on the highway out of town, there was no other choice but to bring her home with me. The lot, including my spaces, was filled with what looked like gridlock and a demolition derby, so I had to park a good distance away. Third, she insisted on seeing the inside of my townhouse and going to the bathroom before hitting the road, so I had to introduce her to the freak show next door before ever setting foot inside. Fourth, on the way up to the walk to the front door, we encountered a funhouse man in the open doorway, gatekeeper to the drunk, dumb place inside. He was wearing his morning apparel, briefs and a long shirt except with a can of Red Dog instead of coffee in his hand. Fifth, funhouse man looked at us coming up the walk and spoke to me for the first time in 7 months. "You tap that?" I think he said, his wet mouth spitting the words in his dead eyes, scoping my girl. I shifted to put myself between them and the walk as we closed in on the door, and I fished my keys out of my pants. Funhouse man panicked, letting out a squeal before diving inside and slamming the door. The party went silent instantly. Sixth, my girl was unnerved by this and lost all of her thrill over being with me in that place. She walked inside my home and registered her immediate disapproval. She didn't even want to go to the bathroom there. I remember making some excuses, saying that it's a temporary thing, and the first step to better living, etc. But it was the beginning of the end for us, like she had caught me cheating with a troll doll lady. Seventh, I didn't realize the party had spilled out into the front lawn, and in front of my townhouse until I opened the door to see Chuck, the trucker, standing under my porch lamp looking drunk, stupid, and angry. He was joined by a few strangers who looked equal parts the same condition, and also like I had just fired the lot of them from the sideshow. I stopped inside the screen door trying to think of anything to say, clever or otherwise. Chuck, the trucker, started the conversation. "You go with Kenny?" "What?" "Made crap for brains. I asked you if you went at Kenny in his own home." Nothing like that happened, but I knew immediately that my reality was not shared by those gathered in front of my own home. "No." He said something. I got closer to hear. He squealed like a little girl and ran inside. End of story. I was okay at the end of the first 2 sentences, but my anger got the best of me by the start of the third, and it did little to calm the group, which had swollen to about 8 dozen people, looking for blood or things to break. Chuck was not convinced by my answer, and took a step forward to open my screen door. He put a hand on the knob and stopped. "You step out here, or I come in there." "Go take a crap in a tree. You're not coming in here, and I'm not bleeding over that weirdo friend of yours. You can go beat each other like you normally." Eighth. The word stopped there because Chuck had punched a hole in the screen to get to my face. I fell back and accidentally tackled my now firmly ex-girlfriend. Fortunately, I didn't have much in the way of furniture to break on the way down. The only thing going for me at that moment was the miraculous arrival of police, drawn by the parking fiasco and the noise. My face was broken. My newest ex had a bloody nose and a sprained shoulder, and I was out a good $400 in deposits for a weekend that would never happened. In short order, a few important things happened. Chuck went to jail and the charges against him would become the least of his problems. The party turned into story time, where partygoers spun their best yarn about how I insulted, attacked, and got after Kenny, the funhouse man. I was questioned about the encounter by the police and spent time with an EMT who I totally failed to impress enough to get her number. I was let go as several of the partygoers were arrested for either public drunkenness, disorderly conduct, or outstanding warrants. I'm sure this warmed me to the neighbors and their friends. My weekend companion was rescued from it all by a friend who drove her out of my life forever. You would think 8 things in short order would be enough. I had to continue living next to these people for at least 4 more months, and I was going to spend those months terrified by what they might do to my property while I was working or the burglars coming back. However, 9th, I woke up the next morning to the neighbors cleaning up from the party. Glass and aluminum, plastic and cardboard packed 2 full-size bins. Credit where it's due. The idiots recycled. From the what the heck position of my bedroom window, I noticed 2 of the bottles stood out from the Keystone Red Dog and Milwaukee labels. They were these scratchback labels for my 6-pack. Now, there is a chance that they were brought to the party by a guest with better taste in beer than friends, but that was too much of a coincidence. My brain presented a question that I could not answer. Where is the attic access in this townhouse? I just assumed there was one somewhere, but never actually looked or came across it. So how did maintenance get into it? While totally unrelated to the beer bottle on a conscious level, my paranoia and cynical nature collaborated on a series of connections. As I looked around the house for a drop that I had missed for months, my brain worked in its weird way to line up facts in such a way that would sound insane if I wrote it all out. I went upstairs. My office was where the funk smell had been most pungent. I looked around again and decided to check the closet. I didn't check it before because there was nothing in it. On the carpet, I noticed a light dusting of drywall and paint flecks. I assumed it was rubbing from the sliding door against the wall, but it concentrated at the side by the wall and not equally along the track. The closet only had hanging shelves on the interior side. Looking up, I expected to see an attic access port, but found a jagged square carved into the drywall ceiling. Maintenance was not exactly flip this shack quality, but I didn't think even they would use a box cutter to carve a hole in my ceiling, and none of them were skinny enough to fit through that. The funhouse man was skinny enough to potentially weasel up and down. The scuff mark on the inside wall of the closet was pretty telling. It took a while for the police to make their way over in response to my non-emergency call, but it quickly gathered their interest when the first responding officer reported what everyone missed the first time they had searched the home. 3 unmarked cars arrived after the initial squad car. My neighbors were uncharacteristically quiet once the first cruiser rolled up around noon. I offered a folding ladder and the police looked up into the blistering hot attic. A hole had been cut through the insulation and a spot in the corner wide enough for a smaller, slender person to fit through. I was questioned again downstairs for about an hour, before I heard more voices upstairs than I remember going up there. Before I could ask, a familiar face appeared at my door. My landlord, Ahmed, looked concerned and astonished, which was a new expression, and the third after his. "Can I take your money?" and his general resting, screw-off face. "What has happened?" he asked. "What is going on? Are you alright?" He walked into my home without invitation and sat with me on my sofa. I asked him if he was there to fix my cracked window. Everything else happened without my direct involvement. I remained a guest in my own home for most of the day as police took photos and marched up and down my stairs. I learned that my assumption about the attic work was wrong, that workers had to access specific units to get around the firewalls between them. In fact, there were holes on the firewall that allowed workers to enter the roof in one unit and run the entire length of the building. It was a measure that saved time and footsteps, but was a violation of several laws and codes. meaning that Ahmed's life was about to become much more complicated and expensive. These gaps in the firewalls also allowed someone to drill a hole in their own ceiling and run the length of 11 other homes, walking on the same boards laid by the property owners that muffled their presence. Every single unit in that block had a hole similar to the one in my ceiling. Furthermore, at one time, the building had been wired for cable through the roof, and holes that had been cut to fish the cable into the upstairs bedrooms had been plugged up years earlier during an upgrade. Some of those patches had been replaced with removable plugs, giving someone a clear view into various bedrooms. In the attic, police found a step stool with a rope tied to the top step. It was stashed in the corner of the roof over my next door neighbor's unit. But that's not the weirdest thing. Though all evidence pointed to the main access point being the smaller bedroom in my neighbor's unit, police did not arrest Funhouse Man or Troll Doll Lady for the crime. Around 3 in the afternoon, police had recovered items stolen from other units along with various controlled substances. Troll Doll Lady was arrested for violating the terms of her bond, and Funhouse Man was taken in for the drugs. I was shocked to see a third person, not Chuck, walked out of the townhouses in cuffs. I had never met him before. He was rail thin, thinner than Funhouse Man by half. An old man's face and a young man's body, with scars and bruises all over skin that I've only ever seen on corpses, white and waxy. He was unclothed except for soiled basketball shorts. He literally recoiled as if allergic to outside air and sun, and had to be dragged shoeless to the cruiser. I don't know who that kid was, but I got the feeling he never left the townhouse ever. Maybe not even the attic. The thought that this skeletal creep was looking in on me and had access to my life makes me overly cautious these days. I have eyes everywhere in my home, and I take pains to inspect the smallest spaces in and around my property. I often wake in the night, seeing that face peering at me through a window or from the dark. It's been a long time, and everyone I mentioned in this story by name is dead. I don't know about the kid though. I never got a name and I was unable to find him in any police record. Maybe he doesn't really exist. Maybe he didn't show up on any records and is languishing in prison as John Doe. Or maybe he's out there lurking in some upper level of an apartment building, or hiding inside the basement or walls. I've rarely ever felt truly home since. I've had a couple of frightening occurrences throughout my life, but none that have ever rivaled the distressing nature of one particular night during my senior year of high school. I had been coping through the latest in a series of breakups with my girlfriend, and was searching for any reason I could find to leave my angst dungeon of a home office, where I already spent countless hours dwelling on the end of the relationship. My friend Mia resided in a neighboring subdivision and had invited me down to hang out with herself and her brother. Since I had only been acquainted with Mia for a short while, my social anxiety urged me to forward the invitation along to another friend and frequent companion of mine, Robert. Mia had no trouble with this, and Robert seldom if ever required advance notice for casual misadventures, allowing for his presence to be guaranteed well before asking him. Mia had conditions of her own, insisting that I call her to meet us as soon as we arrived at the transit station in her area. I had been to Mia's house once on an evening not too long before, where I shared in a politely tense dinner interrogation with her folks, and it was a fairly straightforward route from where the bus would let us off. The gesture never registered as anything more than a courtesy, and so I agreed unquestioningly, just feeling fortunate for the company. Robert had amassed a small cache of fireworks that he had been looking to set off at an appropriate time. Since that time never arose, I let him know that tonight was the night, as I waited on him at the back porch by his bedroom. He muttered a protest then, and then immediately relented and snatched indiscriminately from the stockpile underneath his bed. In 20 minutes, a city bus took us through familiar haunts, eventually crossing over the bus trap that existed as an informal boundary between two communities on the northwest side of town. It was a tightly constructed underpass accessible only to public transit and compact commercial trucks, with a walkway protected by concrete dividers for bikes and pedestrian foot traffic. The central feature and origin of its name is a square pit with a loose arrangement of steel bars, meant to ensnare intruding vehicles that didn't meet the specified requirements to enter. This was before the dawn of the sports utility vehicle would render them obsolete, and an automated gate was installed to continue justifying its function. Now a bit of an anomaly in its current environment, it still served its purpose and was akin to an unguarded border checkpoint. I hadn't anticipated going out that night, so when we made it to the station close to 11, I was consciously conserving my limited cell life to let Mia know of our arrival. The low battery icon flashed after the call, an indication that there was plenty enough left over to punish me with the prospect of messaging my ex that would appear through the virtue of wishful thinking. As Robert and I warbled through a catalog of 80s tunes at facilitating pitches, a beat behind tempo, a black SUV with tinted windows blew past us in the parking lot next to the station. Its tires whirred banshee-like against the asphalt as it weaved erratically, the unseen driver beating out a rallying cry on the horn before tearing off toward the same inner-ring suburb that we were destined for ourselves. Mia and our brother arrived not long after, and we set our sights on a nearby schoolyard to cause a racket with some consumer-grade fireworks. In a fleeting spectacle, the twin Roman candles and a majority of the bottle rockets had been expended, with all but the few duds in the array fulfilling their advertised purpose of attracting attention. Another roving SUV came streaking down the road closest to the schoolyard within minutes, a collection of balloons tethered to the interior of the vehicle. Through a gap in the rear window battled the wind's thrust before the vehicle came to a jarring halt. Mia abruptly directed us to wait where we were and jogged off in the direction of the idling SUV. We witnessed a figure hop out of the passenger seat to approach her. Though they were out of earshot, I felt a deep ease of relief as she received the greeting with warmth. There was a rapport and friendliness not commonly associated with the foreboding strangers that you meet after dark. Mia was the type of person that you couldn't help but like. She was bright, amiable, talented, and never did much to offend anyone. She treated everyone on equal terms, and her resulting popularity eclipsed the alleged social strata of senior high. I, on the other hand, was far more familiar with certain classroom archetypes that I ever would have liked to have been. The cliques, the bullies, the bad seeds, many of whom converged on a fixed point of our hometown's map, the apparent center of which was her former district school. In spite of its academic reputation, its student body had attained some degree of notoriety for its high rate of juvenile offenders. I was reasonably confident at this age that the flaring tempers between their respective cliques would simmer off after graduation. But there would always be those select few that would make illicit behavior and more premeditated acts of physical violence a lifestyle choice. I was, and still am to this day, a tiny man at 30 years old, never rising above 5'4", and what you might conceive as an easy target. The reputation I held in my own halls was one of a mischievous but good-natured slacker who could take a punch but couldn't throw one, and I relied on the more beneficial trait to compensate for my deficit of muscle mass when diffusing tense situations with somebody outside of my chosen circle of oddballs. I didn't have a foolproof rate of success, but it allowed me to skate by relatively unscathed for most of my scholastic career. Me and the stranger exchanged a quick embrace before their parting waves. I watched the SUV as it pulled a hasty U-turn, careening past a stop sign off to startle unwary pedestrians with its engine elsewhere away from us. Unprompted but desired nonetheless, we were provided with some critical context that was about to color the remainder of the night as soon as she had reconvened with our group. That was a friend of mine from St. Francis. They're out celebrating his buddy's 18th birthday by driving around and beating the crap out of people walking by themselves. You're fine with me here, but I think we should probably head inside now. In the moments that followed, I took notice of how the lights emanating from the surrounding homes in the area had grown increasingly scarce, the parceled rations of security that they represented winking out of existence along with them. Fine by me then. I would rather not be elected the guest sacrifice in some kid's twisted adulthood initiation rites, as he proves his machoism to his buddies, while they trade turns packing my face in. When we got to Mia's house shortly thereafter without any incident, the moon had grown contemplatively quiet, as we settled into having had a lighthearted evening of adolescent memory-making spoiled by douchebags. Everyone was worn out, so we agreed to toss on a film, some inoffensive mid-aughts comedy that I can't recall the name of. Not even 20 minutes had passed in the runtime before Mia's father appeared at the living room threshold. Mia, it's getting late. Say goodnight to your friends. There's been a lot of speculation whenever I've recounted this story over who was primarily at fault for the avoidable events that transpired afterward. Though I've heard out accusations that I've been overly forgiving, I remained of the mind that everyone was honestly intended. Mia had spoken in our favor, citing the potentially dangerous circumstances that awaited us outside. Her father met these claims with a dose of parental skepticism, while Robert and I advocated for our own well-being by sitting in abject silence as the scene unfolded. Despite the mild to moderate unrest from earlier, the sedating calm of lounging indoors on a sofa had a minimizing effect on the risks involved. I mean, taking into consideration how many dozens of streets this community was comprised of, if we moved quickly and took precautions, what was the likelihood that these goons would ever catch a second glimpse of us? We dismissed it all as an exaggeration. She had made her best effort to explain our situation and dissuade her father from booting us to the curb. But as an honor student with devoutly invested parents, the rules of the household were unavoidable. Bed by 12 and no sanctuary for teenage boys overnight. There were no argument to convince him otherwise. As we were standing on Mia's front porch, she belatedly informed us that there was not one or two, but a total of 4 SUVs out on the prowl. After offering us her profuse apologies and well wishes, we reassured her that we would be fine. She then latched the door behind us so we could set to recalculating our odds. My cell battery had long since been drained, having waited for that text like the lovelorn sap that I was. Robert, on the other hand, had never even bothered to carry a cell phone with him, as he communicated with everyone he knew almost exclusively over MSN Messenger. Ill prepared for the occasion, it looked as if we were resigned to traveling by foot. We paced about cul-de-sac, considering which routes would keep us from straying onto the main streets and arterial roads. The most sensible was also the longest, with the bus trap being a clean gateway from the birthday boy and his pals. We were fortunate to have gone to school in the area, and knew of the many tucked-away corridors and shortcuts, where ample tree canopies would be able to conceal us in the shadow. We could stay virtually hidden for 80% of the journey if we used our wits. It's worth reiterating here again that we were remedial teenagers for whom flexing poor judgment skills was a respected tradition. We were also aware that the transit station would be shuttering relatively soon. While the train wouldn't be any of use to us since this particular station was the final terminal on the line, there was just a sliver of a chance that the buses might still be active. It was only a short walk back the way we came through a park overlooking the entrance. From there on, we would be completely exposed with nothing but looming storefronts in a large, barren parking lot illuminated by what might as well have been the halogen floodlights that they shine on escaped prisoners as they rush across the yard towards freedom. We chose to hazard our bets since it was practically on our way to the bus stop anyhow. Taking inventory of what could prove useful to us, I wasn't at all surprised to find my pockets empty, save for a wallet and the dead cell phone. Robert held a Zippo lighter in his possession, as well as a single remaining bottle rocket. Needled by a desire to feel resourceful, I scanned our surroundings before spotting a remodeled home with an industrial disposal bin out of the front street. I leapt inside and re-emerged with a wooden plank fanged with crooked finishing nails that I hefted in my hand like buffered Pusser Reborn. This failed to impose any profound dread, but I did win a derisive laugh from Robert. He gestured at me with his bottle rocket, expressing its desire to fire it into someone's face should they try and come near us. Now heavily armed and in much higher spirits, we skulked along the interposing footpaths between neighborhoods, which in hindsight did little to help us steady our nerves. Our courage, however, faltered at an intersection, where a lone, dusky street lamp stood sentinel by a vestibule of low-slung branches so compact, it was as if someone had draped a shroud across the moon. Lifelong urbanites get to relish in the light pollution that paints our skyline, mistaken in the belief that even proper darkness has a translucent quality. And then here was this one stretch of pavement so innocuous by day, restyled after sunset as a disorienting tunnel with the stark density of exhaust fumes. We crept in a maximum of 25 to 30 feet ahead before paralysis struck. The night's deserted ambience punctuated by the remote echoes of shouting, squealing tires, and the sudden acceleration of a vehicle. Only able to locate each other by our voices suspended in limbo, we agonized in whispers as to how we should proceed. Do we find an alternate detour or stick it out, listening for any further suggestion of movement on the other side of the emptiness? Beset with paranoia, the eerie silence it turned was a potent incentive to turn around. We briefly contemplated camping out for the remainder of the night, before opting to double back. We subsequently found our way through the park exit to the main thoroughfare. There was little in the way of traffic at night, so if one of the SUVs were to materialize, we would see them plainly and they would see us. We strained our hearing for any trace of obnoxious motor revving before bolting across the road and past the parking lot to the transit bays. We hurriedly checked the posted bus times, but each had made their final loop ages ago, the station clock revealing what our hesitation had cost us. Diminished in resolve, we aimed to take shelter in the train terminal, which was typically left unlocked after hours. If we were to be granted any small mercies, the universe wasn't ready to let us cash in yet, and the locked station doors rattled in their frames as they refused to budge. Our choice determined for us, we moved in to the bus trap. Every distinct noise provided a reason to flinch, never certain if it was a thrill-seeking motorist out for a joyride, or the assailants that were preoccupying our thoughts. There was a strong possibility that someone had called the police on them, or that they had driven off to avoid detection. In a cosmically just world, they had already been under arrest without their fatefully appointed rendezvous with a sorry individual who had the audacity to pick that night out of all nights to take in the early autumn breeze. Maybe they had even grown bored with their party plans altogether. We started to let our guard slip as we neared our old junior high school, believing that the worst case scenario we were on the alert for was already behind us, and I was still lofting around a cumbersome piece of wood, like a full-fledged idiot. It was a welcome lull, but the effects of fatigue began to wear off on me as the initial surge of adrenaline tapered off. Another network of loosely interconnected passages awaited us at the far end of the school. Backyard fences exhibiting the scribbled handiwork of amateur graffiti artists beckoned our entry. Our off-property lunch breaks had taken us that way years beforehand, so we knew for a fact that it had intermittent street lamps every 60 feet or so. Whether they were even operational was a different matter. As it turned out, this was a low priority matter for the community, and to my knowledge, they still haven't been replaced a decade later. Motion-sensitive porch lights would flood our field of view at blinding intervals. Robert, all the while, sparking his Zippo out of pitiful habit to disclose his growing impatience with our inching progress. Twigs snapping between the paws of nocturnal animals, out on a midnight forage, aroused silhouetted figures from my overworked imagination. Ones that reached out with invisible hands to seize their quarry and pummel us bloody. Finally, a steady source of light appeared ahead, and we came out onto the street, with that holiest of landmarks now within sprinting distance, though neither of us were feeling so athletically inclined. Cutting through an elementary school, our humor gradually returned to us, having turned a leisurely stroll into some clumsy trial of stealth. Compared to the winding trip we had taken to get here, full of retraced steps, dead-end deviations, and hesitant plodding through neglected footpaths, this last leg had been lit up like a runway welcoming us home. We slid back into our ordinary banter with safety on the horizon, while I openly considered how long I would hold on to my improvised bludgeon before I discarded it in some baffling manner that a homeowner would try in vain to puzzle together at sunrise. As I took listless swings with the plank in my forward gate, a black SUV came peeling out from around the corner on the left-hand side of the bus trap. The balloons hung from the rear window flailed backward from the velocity as the engine roared. Had they been waiting there for somebody this entire time? It didn't really matter at this stage. There's no way they hadn't seen us. I cursed repeatedly as we dashed half a block in retreat, turning off on a street adjacent to the elementary school. We both had to think fast, as their rapid advance only left us with a rough 15-second lead, even at the posted speed limit, and they had no intention of giving us any advantages. The front yards melded together, lacking any distinction between property lines, leaving us nowhere to crouch and hide. We could hear the vehicle gaining ground on us and nearing the bend. Our head start had all but evaporated, and I raised a panicked finger toward the only space that could pass for cover, a partial strip of flimsy side yard fencing. No accompanying front fence, no perimeter hedges, nothing. Ashamedly, I entertained the impulse of launching myself over the fence, knowing full well it would leave Robert behind. Thinking better of it, I sprawled myself onto the grass, hugging close to the fence, with Robert following suit. Long like boars and stiff as corpses, our respective implements at the ready, looking all the more laughable and desperate than ever before. A loose copse of birch, a willow, and a massive pine tree was all that could shield us from an imminent beating now. The SUV lost speed as it made the turn, the headlights shine intensifying as they drew closer. We may have unwittingly bought ourselves the elements of surprise without a clue as to how we would properly exploit it. Robert uncapped the Zippo and nestled it close to the fuse, his thumb on the flint wheel. I attempted to press myself further into the ground, but the hard earth wouldn't give way. They came to a full stop in part at the edge of the property, right next to us. The sleek chrome grille peered out from beyond the fence line. The doors popped open, gravel crunching as the birthday group murmured indiscernibly and began pacing as they searched for us. I tried to gather a sense of the disparity in numbers by tracking their footfalls. My ear wasn't up to the task, but it was enough to know that the ratio was firmly set against us, and we would be surrounded if we decided to flee. I had seldom, if ever, swung a fist at anyone, always too busy with the illusion of composure to defend myself at the risk of looking foolish for it. At least then, being on a first-name basis with my rogues and gallery of aloof tormentors was humanizing enough that a scuffle wouldn't escalate to injure anything but my pride. These people were strangers. They weren't aware of the persona that I affected, My ragdoll antics were I would swallow pain with a wiry smirk. They didn't know I pretended to treat it as a game. All they wanted was to hurt us, so this was it. This is where I would be forced to shed the layers of protective cowardice and earn my own respect. I gripped the plane tightly. Tiny splinters burrowed into my palm as I caught the sound of my thrumming heartbeat. This helped summon 125 pounds of buried aggression from years worth of play acting my way through confrontation to outmatch the fear of a losing fight. My free hand fumbled on the nails as I pried them upright. I prayed that Robert's firework would generate a sufficient amount of confusion so that I would get a few good cracks during the ambush before they would take us back on the ground and ready for our ambulance ride. Even if I was only going to get in one strike, I was going to make sure that it connected. But then, everything fell into a drawn-out stillness with only the galvanic hum of the nearest street lamp to add in its supporting harmony. An uncharacteristic peace overtook my focused reveries of meting out a solitary blow, of disfiguring bloodshed when I heard a frustrated voice lowly uttering the phrase, "Screw it." Slamming doors followed in the wake of this statement. The SUV sprung to life, and the wheels skidding as they pulled out and sped off. Just like that, they were gone. The rigor of our bodies softened as we collapsed in place, not yet ready to sit up for fear that this might be a tactic. The longer we stayed, the clearer it became that we had been gifted Deus Ex Machina when we spent the night waiting for her. When we had regained our bearings and were ready to push ourselves up, we drifted along these side streets in relative quiet. We never wandered away from the center of the road. I haven't come up with a satisfying explanation as to what kept us from skulking the remainder of the way back to the bus trap. It just didn't seem necessary any longer. I suppose you can chalk it up to a symptom of trauma's insulating afterglow. Though, if you were to ask us then, we wouldn't have been able to process the shock and admit such a thing. It would live on as another treasured anecdote until the day that we could afford psychologists to tell us otherwise. We had almost forgotten to acknowledge the fact that we had made it. From within our collective fugue, we glanced back down the road looking for some significance to the whole ordeal because it felt like the type of thing a person ought to do. But if there was any poignant denouncement waiting for us at the end, it wasn't readily apparent from the other side of the underpass. If I had to shoehorn in a takeaway, it's that despite my aversion to conflict and the many previous assumptions about my yellow instincts, if miserable happenstance finds me backed into the corner again, I might just be able to stand my ground. I just sure as heck hope that there's some discarded timber nearby when that time comes.